Today, I bring you a charming new mystery featuring none other than the brilliant Hercule Poirot, the world's most famous Belgian detective, created by Agatha Christie. This case is filled with twists, clever clues, and Poirot's signature little grey cells at work. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now let's get started. It was a grey and listless afternoon in London, the sort that compels one to seek solace in a pot of fine Darjeeling and the warm, bustling comfort of a grand hotel lounge. Hercule Poirot and I had just settled into our usual corner at the Beaumont Hotel, a place which, by Poirot's estimation, had the most symmetrical arrangement of teacups and chairs in all of Mayfair. "I assure you, Hastings," Poirot was saying, as he delicately stirred his tea, "there is more psychology to the pouring of tea than most people imagine. Observe, when the milk is added before the tea, it reflects a temperament inclined to obedience rather than initiative." I gave a snort. "Really, Poirot? Must you deduce a person's entire personality from their teacup?" "Ah, but I do not deduce. It is the little grey cells, mon ami. They reason." Before I could respond, a soft gasp rippled across the lounge. A young woman, elegantly dressed in a pale lavender suit and matching hat, had risen from her chair near the fireplace, only to sway slightly and collapse in a most theatrical fashion onto the thick Persian rug. Her cup and saucer shattered upon the marble floor. Several patrons leapt to their feet. A waiter dashed over. Poirot was already standing, his eyes narrowing with interest rather than alarm. "Come, Hastings," he said. "A collapse is rarely without cause, and often with consequence." We approached as a gentleman, possibly her companion, fanned the woman with a napkin, murmuring her name. "Clara, Clara, can you hear me?" "Chérie," Poirot said gently, kneeling beside her. "Breathe slowly, yes? You have merely fainted, but the world is not ending, unless you insist upon it." The woman stirred slightly. A faint floral scent drifted up toward us, and beneath it, a curious trace, sharp and almond-like, just enough to stir something in the recesses of memory. Poirot froze, nostrils twitching. He looked at me sideways and muttered, "That, Hastings, is not a perfume I know, but it is one I do not like." The woman came to moments later, blinking rapidly as she was helped into a sitting position on the chaise near the window. Her companion, a tall, dark-haired man with the look of one used to expensive troubles, seemed equally relieved and irritated. "Just the heat," he muttered. "She hasn't eaten, always skipping meals." Poirot, ever diplomatic, offered a smile. "Ah, mademoiselle, forgive me for interfering. Hercule Poirot, at your service." Her eyes met his with a flicker of recognition. "The detective," she whispered, touching her temple delicately. "How very odd. I was just reading about one of your cases last week." "Fortune favours the suffering," he replied smoothly. "Might I ask, mademoiselle, what scent you wear? It is unusual." She blinked. "It's one of mine. I create perfumes. Essence de minuit, it's called. Still in development." "Why?" "Because," Poirot said slowly, "there is a bitterness to it, a ghost beneath the beauty." She gave a small, nervous laugh. "Everyone says that. It's meant to be haunting." Poirot murmured, his gaze lingering on the pale pallor of her cheeks. The manager had appeared by now and was offering apologies and suggesting a cab be called. The woman, still slightly dazed, accepted the gentleman's arm and allowed herself to be escorted out. Poirot watched her go with that particular look of his, the one that meant his brain had begun ticking. I had seen it too many times not to take notice. "She seemed fine by the time she left," I remarked. Poirot didn't respond at first. Then he said, There is perfume, and there is poison, Hastings. Sometimes, the difference is measured only by intent. The next morning, I found Poirot standing at our sitting room window in Charterhouse Square, dressed impeccably as always, and gazing down at the street below with furrowed brows. "We are about to have a visitor," he announced without turning. Before I could question his clairvoyance, the doorbell rang. A moment later, Miss Lemon appeared with her usual efficiency and announced, "A Miss Clara Delacroix, to see you, Monsieur Poirot." The young woman from the hotel entered hesitantly, the same lavender hat clutched tightly in her gloved hands. Today she looked even paler, her composure brittle as glass. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, I hope I'm not intruding. After yesterday, I didn't know where else to go." "Sit, mademoiselle. Compose yourself. Now, what troubles you?" She lowered her voice. "I think someone is trying to kill me." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "That is not a light accusation." "I know how it sounds, but it's been happening for weeks now. Fainting spells, dizzy turns, always after wearing one specific perfume. The one from yesterday, Essence de Minuit." She reached into her handbag and produced a crumpled envelope. "This arrived anonymously 2 days ago." Poirot opened it carefully. Inside, a single typed line read, "Your beauty will be your end." I felt a chill run down my spine. "And you believe this is connected to your perfume?" Poirot asked softly. She nodded. "Yes, I've had samples tampered with, and my lab has been entered at night, but no one believes me." Poirot took the envelope and then, very deliberately, removed a blotting paper from his desk drawer. "May I?" he asked, and dabbed a drop of the perfume onto it. He sniffed. His eyes narrowed. "There is something here, Hastings," he said, quietly but firmly. "Something most sinister. We shall investigate." Clara Delacroix sat with her gloved hands neatly folded, her pale fingers twisting the edge of her handbag nervously as she tried to maintain composure. Her voice trembled slightly, not with drama, but genuine unease. "It started about 6 weeks ago," she said. "I'd wear one of my sample blends for testing, usually in the morning. I'd feel fine for an hour or so. And then, lightheadedness, pressure behind the eyes, nausea. Twice, I nearly blacked out entirely. The first time I thought I'd skipped breakfast, but it kept happening. Only when I wore Essence de Minuit." Poirot tilted his head. "And this perfume, it is your creation, oui?" "Yes. My signature fragrance. I wanted something unusual, something that lingered in memory. Darker tones, midnight notes, amber, myrrh, white almond, a trace of orris root. I was working closely with Victor, my business partner. He controls production, but I create the formulas myself." "And you are certain," Poirot asked softly, "that it is only that perfume which brings about these effects?" "I've tried others, even my older lines. Nothing. It's only that one. I thought at first it was just a reaction to the new formulation. But then I noticed someone had been in my lab, more than once. And then the note arrived." She leaned forward, voice taut. "I know it sounds mad, but I'm not imagining it." Poirot gave a slight nod, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Non, mademoiselle. To imagine is a talent. To notice, that is a gift. And you have noticed something others have missed." Hastings and I exchanged a glance. I was not yet sure whether to be alarmed or amused, but Poirot's expression had grown grave. When Clara had left, thanking Poirot profusely and promising to send him a full ingredient list of her perfume, there was a silence in the room that I didn't quite know how to break. Poirot stood at his desk, examining the blotting paper he'd dabbed with her scent. He sniffed once, then again, eyes half closed. "Well?" I asked. "Is it just a strong perfume, or is there something more to it?" Poirot did not answer at first. Instead, he reached for a small crystal vial on the shelf, a reference sample of pure benzaldehyde, which he occasionally used to test olfactory sensitivity. He uncapped it, held it alongside the blotting paper, and nodded ever so slightly. "Almond," he said, "but not the pleasant almond of the confectioner. No, no. This is more, how shall we say, sinister." He turned to face me, eyes sharp. "You recall, Hastings, what else smells of bitter almonds?" I frowned. "Cyanide, isn't it?" "Just so. But surely she wouldn't be using cyanide in a perfume." Poirot gave a faint, sad smile. "One would hope not. But then again, mon ami, women have been known to wear many things in the pursuit of beauty. Gowns stitched with mercury threads, powders laced with lead. It is only logical that perfume too might have its dangers." He folded the blotting paper carefully and tucked it into an envelope. "We shall visit her tomorrow," he said firmly. "And the good Victor Lemaire. I fear, Hastings, that Essence de Minuit is not merely haunting, it is deadly." Clara Delacroix lived in a grand red brick townhouse nestled in a quiet crescent of Kensington. The sort of house where balconies draped with ivy overlooked manicured hedges and polished brass knockers gleamed like gold. It was elegant, refined, and, as Poirot commented as we approached the gate, not a place one associates with danger, Hastings. And yet, danger comes most often in silk gloves. We were admitted by a maid in a smart black dress, who led us through high-ceilinged corridors and into a pale drawing room, all dove-grey furnishings and tasteful mirrors. Clara greeted us with a wan smile. "I'm grateful you came, Monsieur Poirot," she said, offering her hand. "I've been on edge since our last meeting." "Then let us restore your peace of mind, mademoiselle," he replied. "But we shall begin, if you please, with precision. Who else has access to your perfume lab?" She hesitated. "Only Victor. He holds the keys to the production cabinets. And Estelle, my cousin, she occasionally helps with packaging. But the actual formulas, I keep them to myself." "Bon, we would like to see this lab." Clara led us through a back corridor, down a short flight of stairs, and into what resembled an apothecary's dream: rows of glass bottles, long marble countertops, and a faint scent of jasmine, musk, and citrus lingering in the air. Poirot moved slowly, eyes darting from vial to vial. He paused near a locked cabinet, then turned sharply to Clara. "This lock, it has been forced recently, has it not?" She blinked. I don't know. I haven't noticed." "Ah," he said, tapping the scratched brass. "But someone else may have." I watched him, as I often did, with equal parts admiration and confusion. He had a way of finding something just slightly off and spinning it into something much larger. He stood still for a long moment, then nodded to himself. "We shall speak to this Monsieur Victor next." Victor Lemaire had the air of a man who had once been extraordinarily handsome and still clung to the idea. He wore a cravat that was far too elaborate for daylight hours and had the unfortunate tendency of checking his reflection in every reflective surface. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he said smoothly, as we were shown into a study lined with expensive-looking books. "I understand you're investigating perfumes." Poirot gave a polite nod. "Perfumes? And poison, Monsieur Lemaire. Sometimes the two are close companions, no?" Victor gave a quick laugh, which didn't reach his eyes. "Surely we're not taking Clara's fainting fits that seriously." Poirot seated himself. "We take seriously that which the victim takes seriously. Mademoiselle Delacroix believes she is being targeted. She also believes she's creating the next Chanel No. 5, Victor said with a shrug. "Creative minds, you understand." "And yet," Poirot said lightly, "you, monsieur, hold the keys to the production cabinets, That is a great trust. Victor leaned back, eyes cool. We've worked together for 5 years. The business was my idea originally. I financed the first 2 collections. Clara had the nose. I had the capital. Lately, well, let's say I've had to take out certain loans to keep us afloat. Poirot steepled his fingers. So Clara's success, or failure, affects your fortune directly. Is that a question, monsieur? It is an observation, Poirot replied. Victor's expression shifted slightly. Yes, fine. I need this next perfume to succeed. But sabotage? I'm not that desperate. And yet, Poirot murmured, rising slowly, you were not at your country house last weekend as claimed. Victor's jaw tightened. I had business in town. Business best kept quiet? Poirot asked gently. I don't see what that has to do with Clara's perfume. Poirot paused at the door. That, Monsieur le Maire, is the beauty of mysteries. They often smell sweeter just before they turn sour. Estelle Vaughan met us in the conservatory, where she was trimming the leaves of an overgrown orchid with small surgical snips. She looked to be in her early 30s, plainly dressed, with the understated dignity of someone used to being both invisible and indispensable. She greeted us with polite reserve. I'm afraid Clara is resting. The past few days have been rather trying. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed. You are her cousin, mademoiselle. First cousins. We were raised together after her parents died. I've been with her since before the perfume business began. And you assist her? Estelle nodded. With the small things, packaging, correspondence, keeping appointments, nothing technical. I know very little about perfume. Poirot's eyes twinkled. But you notice things, do you not? Those who are quiet always notice. Estelle smiled faintly. That's what Clara says, that I'm good at seeing what others miss. Poirot glanced at the orchid, then at her gloves. You believe your cousin is mistaken about the danger? Estelle hesitated just a second too long. I believe she's exhausted. She works long hours, often skips meals, forgets to sleep. The stress of launching a new fragrance, it's taken its toll. And the fainting? She's always had a dramatic side, Estelle said softly. Perhaps this is a cry for attention. Poirot said nothing for a moment. Then, has she received such attention before, mademoiselle? For illness. A flicker crossed Estelle's expression, quickly gone. Not like this. He studied her in silence. Then, as gently as one might brush dust from a mirror, he said, It is the quiet ones, Miss Vaughan, who often see, and sometimes do, the most. We found Dr. Armitage in Clara's sitting room, adjusting a stack of prescription bottles into a neat little row on the silver tray. He was a thin, angular man with meticulously combed silver hair and wire-rimmed spectacles that flashed whenever he turned his head. A man, I thought, who liked his patients obedient and his diagnoses unchallenged. Ah, gentlemen, he said briskly, rising. I take it you're here regarding Miss Delacroix's episodes. Indeed, said Poirot, seating himself with exaggerated care, as though the act itself required calculation. You are the attending physician, monsieur. Family doctor, yes. And I can assure you, this is not a case for Scotland Yard. Clara's condition is entirely self-induced. Psychosomatic, to be blunt. You mean, I interjected, you think she's imagining it? Dr. Armitage adjusted his spectacles, not consciously, of course. But in high-strung individuals, particularly those in creative fields, it is not uncommon for the body to express emotional strain through physical symptoms. Poirot nodded slowly, thoughtfully. So, you believe Mademoiselle Delacroix is not poisoned, but rather performing her suffering? Dr. Armitage hesitated, then gave a diplomatic shrug. Not intentionally, but she thrives on attention. These episodes tend to occur when stakes are high, before a launch, after an argument, following rejection. She faints. Others rush in. A pattern. And you have found no physiological cause, Poirot pressed. None whatsoever. Poirot rose and walked to the window. You are certain of that? I am. Poirot turned, his eyes sharp. Then perhaps, doctor, you should concern yourself not with her fainting, but with her perfume. I beg your pardon. Poirot's smile was thin. Because if you have failed to notice the scent of bitter almonds, then perhaps it is not only Clara who is imagining things. We first heard of Mireille Dubois in Clara's studio, where Poirot was inspecting a shelf of perfume bottles that looked more like crystal chess pieces than anything functional. Clara, still pale but composed, was answering his inquiries in clipped tones. Mireille is an old acquaintance, she said at last. We studied together in Grasse at the Perfumery Institute. She was always competitive, always mimicking my ideas. And now, she's based in Paris, runs a small atelier, bitter about my success, I think. Poirot rubbed his chin. And has she been in London recently? Clara hesitated. I don't know. I've not seen her in nearly a year. Poirot made a small sound in his throat. Hastings, you will accompany me to the Maison de Parfumerie Française, the boutique near Bond Street. How do you know she'll be there? Because, mon ami, he said with a glint, if I were a jealous perfumer, I would not remain in Paris while my rival launches her masterpiece. And indeed, there she was. Mireille Dubois was seated elegantly behind a mirrored counter, her dark eyes as sharp as flint. She greeted us with cool civility when we introduced ourselves. Clara sent you, didn't she? She said at once. Afraid of a little competition? Poirot raised an eyebrow. We are not here about commerce, mademoiselle. We are here about poison. She smiled without humour. Always the drama with Clara, still pretending she's a victim. She is fainting, often, and only when wearing her own perfume. Then she should stop wearing it, Mireille said dryly. Or perhaps she finally made something so dreadful it's attacking her. Your feelings for her are not affectionate? Poirot asked gently. Mireille leaned closer. She stole my formula 5 years ago. You might say I returned the favour. And yet, Poirot said slowly, you claimed to be in Paris. But this morning, you were seen leaving the Mayfair post office. Mireille stiffened, then gave a slow, dangerous smile. Fine, I'm here. But that doesn't mean I poisoned her. Poirot gave a small bow. No, mademoiselle, but it means you could have. It was a rainy afternoon when we returned to Clara's townhouse. The sky hung low and brooding, and the scent of wet leaves clung to the iron railings. Inside, the atmosphere was no brighter. Poirot had asked for another private inspection of Clara's perfume lab, and she obliged with visible reluctance. I haven't touched anything since your last visit, she said, unlocking the door with a gloved hand. But I did notice something odd after you left. Oh, Poirot said, stepping delicately into the room. Tell me, mademoiselle, what did you observe? There was a draught near the vault cabinet. I'm certain it was closed before. Poirot gave a nod, already moving toward the gleaming brass vault in the far corner. The lock was ornate and old-fashioned, designed more for elegance than for true security. He bent down, adjusted his pocket magnifier, and ran a gloved fingertip along the base of the latch. Voilà, he murmured. Hastings. Observe. The scratches here, just beneath the tumblers. Very fine, almost invisible. Someone has forced this lock, but carefully, with knowledge. You mean someone picked it? Oui, and not a novice. The marks are deliberate, not haphazard. This was done with tools and with calm. He turned back to Clara. How many people possess access to this room? Only myself, Victor, and Estelle, though she rarely enters without asking. The cleaning staff aren't permitted in here. Poirot nodded slowly, then turned his attention to the shelves. Rows of labelled ingredients sat in symmetrical perfection. He scanned the labels quickly: lavender absolute, sandalwood, civet, neroli, until he stopped. "This bottle, where is the benzaldehyde?" he asked sharply. Clara frowned. "There should be 2 small vials behind the iris root. I use it for almond base notes." "And yet," Poirot said, holding up the empty slot, "it is no longer here." I glanced over his shoulder. "Isn't benzaldehyde what gives that bitter almond scent?" "Precisely, mon ami. And it is also a compound found in certain cyanide derivatives." Poirot turned back to the table, flipping open Clara's perfume journal. Each formula was handwritten in elegant, slanted script, until he reached one page where a torn stub remained. "The formulation for Essence de Minuit," he said quietly. "It has been removed." Clara paled. "But I never tear pages from that book." Poirot snapped the cover shut. "Then, mademoiselle, someone else has." He stood perfectly still, eyes narrowed. "There is a hand at work here, subtle, patient, and intelligent. But no crime is committed without motive. We must now ask, for whom does this perfume spell disaster, and for whom might it spell fortune?" That night, as the wind scraped like nails across the windows of our flat, Poirot was in one of his more pensive moods. He had spread Clara's notes across the dining table and arranged them as though preparing a game of chess. He studied the ingredients, his fingertips drumming softly. "Something troubles you, Poirot?" I ventured, pouring myself a glass of brandy. "But of course," he replied, not looking up. "There are contradictions. The perfume causes illness, yes, but only to Clara. Others smell it and remain unharmed. Curieux, n'est-ce pas?" "You think she's exaggerating." "No, mon ami. I think she is sincere. But sincerity and truth are not always lovers." Before I could probe further, the telephone rang. Miss Lemon's voice crackled from the hallway. "It's Miss Delacroix, Mr. Poirot. She sounds very distressed." Poirot took the receiver with a swift step. "Mademoiselle." "Speak clearly, I pray you." There was a pause. Then Clara's voice, breathless and panicked. "It's Victor. He's unconscious. He was testing a new batch in the lab and collapsed." Poirot's eyes darkened. "Call for a doctor, but do not touch anything. We come at once." 10 minutes later, we arrived to find Victor Lemaire sprawled across the marble workbench, pale and utterly still. A strong floral scent hung in the air. Essence de Minuit, unmistakable, though sharper, more pungent than before. Dr. Armitage hovered nearby. He's alive, but his pulse is faint. I suspect chemical inhalation. Poirot bent over Victor, sniffed once, then examined the stopperless vial near his hand. "Foolish," he muttered. "Reckless, but not unexpected." He turned to Clara, who was trembling. "He took it upon himself to adjust the formula." She nodded. "He said he wanted to stabilize it, add depth before the final blend went to press. He didn't tell me what he changed." Poirot's lips drew into a thin line. Then he paid dearly for his initiative. He gestured for Hastings and I to step aside. "You see now, mon ami," he said gravely, "this is no longer theory. This is fact. Someone has tampered with the perfume, and unless we find out why and who, there will be another collapse, and next time, perhaps not a fortunate one." We found Estelle Vaughan in the morning room, seated by the bay window with a sewing basket in her lap. The thread in her hand barely moved. She was watching the street outside with the intensity of one used to observing life through glass. Poirot, ever the gentleman, greeted her with a courteous bow. "Mademoiselle Vaughan," he said, "may we impose upon you again? There is still much that is not clear." She offered a faint smile. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I understand you must leave no thread untied. A very apt metaphor, he said, eyeing her embroidery. And how is your cousin? She's resting. Victor's collapse frightened her terribly. Poirot nodded gravely. Yes, an unfortunate event. Curious too. He tested a batch she believed safe. Estelle didn't respond, but the thread snapped between her fingers. Pardon, she said quickly. I must have pulled too hard. Tell me, Poirot said gently, do you often assist Clara in the lab? No, never with formulas, just packaging and some labelling. I'm careful not to interfere. Poirot paused. But you must be familiar with the scents, the combinations, the daily comings and goings. Estelle looked wary. I suppose, yes. You see, Poirot continued, someone tampered with the vault, and someone removed a key component and a formula page. Not a stranger, someone who knew where to look and how. Estelle's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for another thread. You think I did it? Non, mademoiselle, he said smoothly. But I think you know who might have. Perhaps someone you wish to protect. Her eyes met his, defiant but uncertain. Clara trusts too easily. She gives people second chances they don't deserve. Like Victor. She looked away. Or Mireille. There was silence. Poirot leaned closer, voice low. You resent her success, do you not? Estelle exhaled sharply. Clara has always had everything. Beauty, admiration, talent. I was just always there. The shadow behind her. Poirot stood, his expression unreadable. Even shadows, mademoiselle, may leave fingerprints. Victor Lemaire regained consciousness 2 days later. We visited him in his private hospital suite, where he lay pale and still, propped up on fine pillows, looking more like a decadent artist than a businessman who'd narrowly escaped death. Poirot sat beside him and observed him in silence for a full minute before speaking. Monsieur Lemaire, you are fortunate. Victor offered a weak smile. If you say so, Poirot. I feel like I was hit by a train full of roses. Poirot chuckled politely. And yet the perfume was not so sweet, eh? Victor grimaced. I was reformulating. Clara's original blend lacked depth. I adjusted the base and tried a whiff straight from the bottle. That's the last thing I remember. Poirot leaned forward. You saw no one? Victor hesitated. There was a presence, a blur. Someone came into the lab. I heard the door, but it was hazy. Can you describe them? A white dress, flowing, maybe silk. I thought it was Clara at first, but it wasn't her perfume. Poirot's brows arched. It was not Essence de Minuit. Number something lighter, powdery. Poirot nodded slowly. Merci, monsieur. You have given us more than you know. As we walked back down the hospital corridor, I turned to Poirot. A white dress. That could be Estelle, or Mireille, couldn't it? Poirot's response was immediate. Oui, and yet Clara also owns many white gowns. You think... Shh, Hastings. Think, yes, but do not assume. The mind must be like the perfume bottle, sealed until the moment is right. Our next stop was Mireille Dubois' boutique. If anything, she was even colder than before, seated in a cloud of ambergris and impatience. I heard about Victor, she said, arms crossed. Poetic justice. You seem unconcerned, mademoiselle, Poirot said mildly, because I had nothing to do with it. Were you in Kensington that evening? I was dining with a friend at Claridge's. Asked the maître d'. Poirot tilted his head. And yet your rivalry with Clara was not merely professional. You accused her of theft. Mireille's eyes narrowed. She stole my blend 5 years ago and passed it off as hers. She's always played the victim, but she's ruthless underneath. You believe she could be poisoning herself? I asked. I wouldn't put it past her. What better way to generate buzz around her brand? Collapse in public, hint at danger, It's the oldest trick in the book. You claim she seeks sympathy, Poirot said. But you benefit from her downfall, do you not? I benefit from truth. If Clara is destroying herself to climb higher, I won't weep. Poirot stood. And yet you remain here, in London, watching. I came for the launch, Mireille replied coolly. I wanted to see the spectacle up close. Poirot offered a deep bow. Then, mademoiselle, I suggest you keep watching, for the performance is far from over, and the final act may surprise us all. We found Dr. Armitage in his consulting room, surrounded by orderly books and the faint, medicinal scent of antiseptic. His expression, as always, was one of mild superiority, one eyebrow permanently raised, as if the world frequently failed to meet his expectations. Poirot folded his hands neatly in his lap and began without pleasantries. Doctor, I should like to revisit your account of Miss Delacroix's recent episodes. Armitage frowned. I've already explained. Clara is highly strung, and her symptoms are consistent with a psychosomatic response, emotional stress manifesting in physical collapse. Oui, Poirot nodded. But allow me to be precise. On the morning of the 3rd of this month, Miss Delacroix collapsed in the lounge of the Beaumont Hotel. I'm aware. I was summoned shortly afterwards. You claimed she had not experienced symptoms prior to that incident. However, and here Poirot produced a small note card from his pocket. According to Miss Vaughan, Clara suffered a similar fainting spell in her studio 2 days earlier. You attended her then, did you not? Armitage adjusted his cuffs. A brief spell. I didn't consider it serious enough to mention. But you prescribed rest and sedatives, no? Poirot asked, voice deceptively light. I often prescribe sedatives. She's a creative type, needs help winding down. Poirot leaned back. Curious, then, that you never considered removing her from exposure to the perfume she suspected. Armitage's eyes flashed. I'm not a chemist, Monsieur Poirot. She asked for reassurance, and I gave it. You gave her silence, Poirot murmured. A dangerous gift when poison may be in play. I noticed the faintest twitch in the doctor's jaw. As we stepped out into the corridor, I glanced at Poirot. Do you think he's involved? Poirot tapped his temple. He has withheld truth, mon ami. That is not guilt, but it is motive's shadow. He does not want scrutiny. And that, Hastings, always deserves closer inspection. It was just after noon when we returned to Clara's home, the air thick with the scent of gardenia wafting from the corridor diffuser. The house, though silent, seemed charged with unease, like a powder room moments before a scandal breaks. Clara greeted us in her drawing room, her appearance dishevelled, her usual composure frayed. I've hardly slept, she said, pressing her fingers to her temples. Everything's falling apart. You are not well, mademoiselle, Poirot observed gently, but I must ask you to indulge my curiosity once more. He turned to Estelle, who had entered carrying a stack of fresh linens. Her movements were brisk, but she paused when Poirot addressed her. Mademoiselle Vaughan, I am most grateful for your assistance. A small matter. May I see your gloves? Estelle blinked. My gloves? Yes, the pair you wore yesterday while assisting with the packaging. She hesitated. I believe I left them in the hall. Poirot offered a small bow. Allow me. He exited briefly and returned with a dainty pair of cream-coloured gloves, delicate and embroidered. He held them with the tip of a pencil. They are scented, he said softly, but not with a fragrance of your own choosing. Non, this is essence de minuit, stronger than one would expect. Estelle paled. Clara asked me to help seal some boxes. I must have gotten it on my hands. Poirot turned to Clara. Did you ask her, mademoiselle? Clara hesitated. Perhaps I don't remember. Things have been so chaotic. Indeed, Poirot murmured, and confusion often conceals intent. He stepped closer to Clara, studying her. You are troubled. That is clear. But tell me, do you trust those around you? She laughed, sudden and brittle. Trust? I can't even trust myself. I thought I was being poisoned. Then Victor collapsed, and sometimes I think I'm going mad. Madness and manipulation often look the same from the outside, Poirot said softly. But one is born of despair, the other of design. I watched her with growing unease. She was shaking slightly, her fingers twitching as though responding to music no one else could hear. She's unraveling, I whispered to Poirot as we stepped into the hallway. He gave a faint nod. Or performing, Hastings? That is the question. He paused, then added, but even the greatest performance leaves a trace. And we are close, very close, to the final act. I must confess, by this point in the investigation, my mind was made up. Everything pointed to Estelle Vaughan. The jealousy, the opportunity, the scented gloves, it all aligned. I was convinced we'd found our saboteur. And yet Poirot, infuriatingly, seemed entirely unmoved. We were back at our flat in Charterhouse Square, and he was carefully trimming a loose thread from his perfectly pressed cuff. Well, I said, standing by the fire, you saw her expression when you mentioned the gloves. And her tone, defensive, twitchy. Surely you can't doubt it now. Poirot did not look up. Mon ami, when you see a mouse in the pantry, do you assume it baked the bread? I blinked. What on earth are you talking about? Poirot smiled faintly. You see what is obvious, and you think it must be true. But the obvious, Hastings, is the most dangerous of illusions. Estelle had access. She had motive. She was always in the background, envious of Clara's success. Ah, yes, Poirot said, but envy is not a straight line. It is a circle. One might envy for love, for money, for recognition. But tell me, did Mademoiselle Vaughan need Clara to fail, or simply to notice her? I hesitated. Well, I suppose nothing, Poirot snapped, suddenly sharp. Facts, Hastings. We deal in facts, not feelings. And I tell you, Estelle Vaughan is not the spider at the centre of this web. Then who is? Poirot rose, straightening his cuffs. Ah, but that, mon ami, is what I am about to find out, for when the words fail, the ink speaks. He tapped Clara's perfume journal on the desk. We return to the source, not of the crime, but of the intention. Come. It is time we read between the lines. The perfume journal was leather-bound, worn at the corners, and smelled faintly of violets and turpentine. Clara had left it with Poirot during our last visit, supposedly so he could study the formulation of essence de minuit. But as I soon discovered, Poirot was less interested in the ingredients, and more in the hand that wrote them. He examined the pages slowly, murmuring to himself as he turned each one. Note how she circles certain base notes, he said. Iris root, orris, amber. She is precise, until the final few entries. I peered over his shoulder. The handwriting changes slightly. Très bien, Hastings. The hand is less confident. The loops are exaggerated. The lines less aligned. Here, her emotions betray her. This is not merely a record. It is a confession in ink. A confession? Poirot tapped a passage. Here, she notes the balance of benzaldehyde, followed by the curious phrase, just enough to unsettle. What does that mean, eh? Not please the nose, not linger, but unsettle, a psychological aim. He flipped to the next page. And this. The scent must outlive the wearer. The memory must remain longer than the presence. Rather poetic, I said. Rather chilling, Poirot corrected. I frowned. You think Clara knew what she was doing? Poirot closed the journal with a snap. "Non, Hastings. I think she planned what she was doing, but only up to a point." He stood, pacing slowly. Her goal was not murder. It was fear, drama, the suffering heroine, struck down by her own brilliance. She wished to reclaim the spotlight, to be mourned in advance. But the performance was flawed. She did not account for Victor's intervention. His collapse was not scripted. And now, I asked quietly, now she is lost in the role she created. Poirot returned the journal to the table, his eyes dark. "She is not mad, Hastings, but she is not entirely sane either. This is not the madness of illness. It is the madness of ego, of vanity pushed to its edge." A silence followed. Even I, slow as I sometimes was, began to feel the truth dawning. Poirot turned to me, his voice low. "The perfume was never meant to kill, but someone forgot that poison has no sympathy for performance." The drawing room of Clara Delacroix's Kensington townhouse had never looked more theatrical. The tall windows were drawn shut, the golden sconces lit low, casting dramatic shadows along the cream walls. Clara herself stood by the fireplace, visibly tense, her fingers clutched around a lace handkerchief that she seemed unaware of twisting again and again. Poirot, seated in the centre of the room like the conductor of a chamber orchestra, had arranged the suspects with deliberate symmetry. Victor Lemaire lounged against the mantel on the opposite side of Clara, feigning nonchalance. Estelle Vaughan sat primly on the edge of a chaise longue, hands folded, her eyes flicking between faces. Mireille Dubois leaned against the window frame with folded arms, watching Poirot as though daring him to amuse her. Dr. Armitage stood near the liquor cabinet, pale and tight-lipped. And of course, I stood at Poirot's side, ready, as ever, to be surprised. Poirot glanced at his watch. "Bon," he said, rising to his feet and buttoning his immaculate jacket. "We are all here, yes? Each of you has told your version of the truth. And now, maintenant, I shall tell you mine." He paced forward, the firelight catching on his patent leather shoes. For weeks, Mademoiselle Delacroix suffered strange symptoms: dizziness, fatigue, even fainting. Doctors said it was stress. Friends said it was delusion. Only one person believed otherwise: moi. He held up a small glass vial from his pocket. "In this bottle, essence de minuit, the same perfume that nearly killed Monsieur le Maire. And yet, mes amis, this bottle contains no cyanide, no overt toxin. What then is the danger?" His gaze swept the room. "The answer, I fear, lies not in what is present, but in how it is present, in who placed it there, and why." Clara shifted uncomfortably. "You see," Poirot continued, "this was no crime of impulse. This was a performance, one staged with precision, emotion, and, as you English say, a flair for the dramatic." Clara's eyes darted to Victor. Estelle looked down at her lap. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "But before I reveal the star of this little production, we must first examine the script. And who, I ask, rewrote their lines after the curtain fell?" His voice dropped. "We begin with Monsieur le Maire." Victor Lemaire straightened as Poirot turned to him, one eyebrow raised. "Monsieur, when we first spoke, you told me you had spent the weekend at your country house in Surrey, that you had not returned to London until after Miss Delacroix's incident at the hotel." Victor gave a smooth smile. "Correct." "Non," Poirot said, gently but firmly. "Incorrect." He turned to Estelle. "You, mademoiselle, heard the back door open late Friday evening, did you not?" Estelle nodded slowly. "I thought it might be Clara, but I didn't ask." Poirot continued. "The staff, too, recall hearing footsteps in the lab that night. And what did I find there the next morning? Fresh fingerprints on the new vial of essence de minuit. Not Clara's, not Estelle's. Yours, Monsieur le Maire." Victor's charm flickered, just for a second. I was testing, refining the base. That's all. And yet, Poirot said, stepping closer, you made no mention of this return to the lab. You claimed to be far away. Why lie? Victor exhaled. Because I didn't want to be blamed. Clara's symptoms had already begun. I knew it looked suspicious. Suspicious indeed, Poirot said. Especially when we learn that your financial situation is precarious. That the failure or success of this perfume line determines your fortune. Victor's jaw tightened. Poirot's voice softened but grew more deliberate. You had motive, access and opportunity. But no, Monsieur le Maire, you are not our villain. Victor looked up sharply. You see, Poirot said with a small smile, you are too pragmatic, a man of margins and markets. But this crime, it was not about money. It was about legacy, about immortality. And that, monsieur, is a far more dangerous perfume. He turned to the room. Let us now consider the rival, the cousin, the doctor, and finally, la créatrice, for it is the artist, mes amis, who sometimes paints her own tragedy. Mireille Dubois raised her chin defiantly as Poirot turned to her. Mademoiselle, he began with a slight bow, you have insisted throughout that you were at the French Embassy Gala on the night in question. I was, she said, eyes narrowing. There were hundreds of guests. Indeed, Poirot agreed, and such events are well documented, are they not? Especially by photographers. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew a slim envelope. Fortunately, he continued, our dear Inspector Japp was able to obtain copies of the gala photographs. They were taken by a society photographer shortly after the toasts. He opened the envelope and held up a glossy black and white photograph. It showed a glamorous room filled with diplomats, socialites, and swirling champagne flutes, but no sign of Mireille Dubois. Poirot turned it slowly to face her. Would you care to point yourself out, mademoiselle? Her lips parted. I must have left before the photo. Ah, Poirot said, but the timestamp is nearly 9 o'clock, and according to your own account, you remained at the gala until past 10. He paused. Unless, of course, you were not there at all. Mireille looked to Clara, then away. Her silence crackled louder than any denial. You came to London to confront Clara, Poirot continued, not with poison, but with pressure. You accused her of stealing your original blend. You threatened to go public. But when she collapsed at the hotel, you saw an opportunity. Mireille crossed her arms. So you think I poisoned her? No, mademoiselle, Poirot said. I think you watched her fall and decided to let the world believe you had nothing to do with it. He lowered the photograph. But secrets, you see, are like perfume. They cling, whether we acknowledge them or not. All eyes turned to Doctor. Armitage, who stood with his arms folded and face set like stone. Poirot approached him with quiet deliberation. Doctor, he said softly, you were called to attend Miss Delacroix several times, were you not? Yes, Armitage replied, as her physician. And each time, Poirot continued, you prescribed sedatives, nothing more. Because she needed rest. She was overworked and anxious. Poirot nodded slowly. And yet you never examined the perfume. You never questioned the correlation between her symptoms and the days she wore essence de minuit. Armitage's brow furrowed. That wasn't my role. Non, doctor, Poirot said, but it was your responsibility. He produced a small vial from his pocket. This is from your surgery, diazoline, a mild sedative, legal but potent in cumulative doses. You prescribed it to Miss Delacroix. She took it faithfully. But what she did not know was that you added it to her tonics without her consent. There was a murmur in the room. Armitage's lips pressed into a line. She wouldn't rest otherwise. Poirot stepped closer. You presented yourself as her protector. But you manipulated her reality. You created dependency under the guise of care. He glanced at Hastings. The line between doctor and puppet master, eh? Why? I asked. Why do it at all? Poirot answered for him. Because control is a powerful narcotic. The doctor enjoyed being needed, and when Miss Delacroix began to drift toward independence, he doubled the dose. Poirot's voice dropped. But this crime, it was not his. He merely set the stage. Another player wrote the script. Armitage didn't speak. He sat down, suddenly smaller, as though the truth had punctured something within him. Estelle sat stiffly, her eyes fixed on the Persian rug beneath her feet. Poirot turned to her with uncharacteristic gentleness. Mademoiselle Vaughan, he said, you have been candid. You admitted your envy, your resentment. It is natural. She looked up sharply. I never wanted Clara hurt. Non, he said. I believe you. You are not cruel. But you were angry. You were tired of being the shadow in her spotlight. Her mouth tightened. You knew of Victor's return. You suspected Mireille's meddling. You said nothing. I didn't think it mattered, she said bitterly. Clara has always managed to turn everything into a stage, even her illnesses. Precisely, Poirot murmured. And that is what the culprit relied upon, that no one would believe her, that even those closest to her would doubt her sanity. Estelle's eyes widened. I believe you saw things, Poirot continued. A torn page, a misplaced vial. But you doubted yourself. And so, the true danger went unnoticed. She whispered, I didn't think she'd really hurt herself. Poirot paused, then said softly, she did not intend to. But art, mademoiselle, when mixed with ego, becomes unpredictable. Estelle's voice cracked. Do you know what it's like to watch someone steal all the air in the room, without even trying? I do, Poirot replied. But I also know this. You are not a murderer. You are merely forgotten. He stepped back. And the forgotten make poor villains, n'est-ce pas? Too observant, too human. There was a silence then, not accusatory, but strangely compassionate. Poirot turned once more to the centre of the room. All the pieces are in place. Now, mes amis, the final perfume must be revealed. The silence in the drawing room stretched taut as piano wire. Poirot let it breathe, just long enough for us all to feel its weight, before turning, slowly and deliberately, toward Clara Delacroix. She stood near the fireplace, her knuckles white against the marble mantel. Her face was drained of colour, but her eyes, I noticed, were oddly calm, resigned even, as if she'd known all along that this moment would come. Poirot spoke quietly, but each word rang with clarity. Mademoiselle Delacroix, he said, you are the author of this drama, the star performer, and now, I fear, also its villain. Clara didn't move. Only the slight tremor of her throat betrayed her. You laced your own perfume with trace amounts of benzaldehyde, just enough to produce physical symptoms, enough to unsettle, as your journal so poetically said. And why? Not to harm, but to haunt, to linger. You wanted to be the perfume that no one could forget. Hastings shifted beside me. But she nearly died. No, Poirot corrected. She nearly made herself die. There is a difference. He turned to the others. Clara's fame was fading. Her sales were declining. The critics called her last launch uninspired. She needed a spectacle, and so she created one. Clara finally spoke, her voice barely audible. It wasn't meant to go that far. But it did, Poirot said. Because Victor, unaware of the stage danger, tested a version of the perfume that contained a higher concentration, one you had not intended to release. He collapsed, and suddenly, the illusion turned to reality. She stared down at the floor. I only wanted to reclaim what I'd lost. The attention, the admiration, the mystery. Poirot stepped forward, not with judgment, but with quiet certainty. Your weapon, mademoiselle, was not poison. It was performance. But performance, like perfume, must be balanced. One note too strong, and it becomes overwhelming, dangerous. There was a long silence. Mireille shifted uncomfortably. Estelle stared at her cousin as if seeing her for the first time. Victor, pale and hollow, closed his eyes. Poirot exhaled. The truth, mes amis, is always the final scent in the room. It lingers, no matter how we try to mask it. Clara sank slowly into a chair, her hands trembling. I didn't want anyone to get hurt, she whispered. But someone did, Poirot replied, including yourself. After the authorities had been called, and Clara was taken gently but firmly into custody, the rest of us sat in the drawing room, still reeling. I turned to Poirot. How did you know, Poirot? She fooled all of us. Poirot gave a modest shrug. Non, mon ami. She performed for you. There is a difference. He sipped from his teacup, untouched until now, and continued. Clara's behavior from the beginning was too convenient. The anonymous note, the specific perfume, the insistence on her symptoms appearing only when essence de minuit was worn. It was too tidy. But there were real symptoms, I protested. You said yourself, she fainted. Oui, yes, and precisely when she needed to. The faint at the hotel. Perfect timing, public, dramatic, effective. But the true clue was her perfume journal. He reached into his satchel and retrieved it again, thumbing through the final pages. She began with traditional notes, amber, myrrh, orris, but the language became erratic, emotional. She wrote of being remembered, of outlasting the bottle itself. He looked at me squarely. A woman who seeks legacy through scent, mon ami, is not simply creating fragrance. She is crafting myth. The missing page told me everything. She had calculated the dosage over time, increasing, measured, theatrical. And Victor? I asked. He derailed the act. He was the unintended casualty, and that is why Clara broke. She never meant for a real victim. She only wanted the illusion of danger. Poirot stood, brushing non-existent dust from his sleeve. Clara poisoned herself not to die, but to be adored, to be feared, to be eternal. A perfume is remembered not for what it is, but for what it suggests. I leaned back in my chair, shaken. Good Lord. Poirot gave a soft, ironic smile. Fame, Hastings, is a perfume most intoxicating and most deadly. For a long moment after Poirot's final revelation, the room remained suspended in silence. Clara Delacroix sat motionless in the high-backed chair near the fireplace, her eyes staring past us all, as though searching some distant place that had long since ceased to exist. Poirot did not press her. He simply waited, hands clasped, head bowed slightly, as if in prayer. And then it happened. A sound escaped her lips, half sob, half laugh. She covered her face with her hands, but the shaking of her shoulders betrayed her composure. The dam had broken. I thought I could control it, she whispered, voice cracked. It was never meant to go so far. Just a few fainting spells, a whisper of danger, something to make them all look at me again. Estelle flinched, but said nothing. Mireille looked away. Even Victor, whose bitterness had been carved into every word of his previous remarks, now simply watched her with an expression of exhausted disbelief. I was drowning, Clara continued. They said I was done, that I'd peaked. The Clara Delacroix touch. They called it passé, forgotten. Her fingers dug into the armrests. But the scent, it was beautiful. It meant something. I wanted it to matter. Poirot remained still. And so, mademoiselle, you made yourself the canvas, the sacrifice. She gave a laugh that twisted into a sob. People love a tragedy, don't they? A suffering artist. I thought if they saw me crumble, they'd care again. They'd buy again. But you tampered with danger, Poirot said gently. And danger, like perfume, does not discriminate. Victor nearly died. Clara buried her face in her hands. I didn't know he'd changed the batch. I only meant to unsettle, to shimmer with fragility. That's what they write about in the papers, isn't it? Fragile beauty. I wanted to haunt them. Poirot stepped forward. And now you do, mademoiselle, but not in the way you imagined. She looked up at him through tear-slicked lashes. I suppose I was always more illusion than substance. Poirot gave the faintest of bows. No, you were real, but you built your legacy upon shadows, and now the truth demands its scent be stronger. She slumped back, utterly spent. Outside we heard the faint hum of a car arriving. The law, it seemed, had impeccable timing. They came quietly. No grand parade of uniformed men, no clanking of cuffs, just two plain-clothed officers with grave expressions and firm but gentle manners. Clara did not resist. She rose slowly, like a woman emerging from a dream, and allowed herself to be led away. Victor stood, but said nothing. Estelle wept silently into a handkerchief. Mireille murmured something in French under her breath, and left without another word. It was only Poirot and I who remained in the drawing room once the door had clicked shut behind them. The scent of essence de minuit still lingered in the air, faint, haunting, bitter. I turned to Poirot, still trying to make sense of it all. She didn't seem evil. Non, Hastings, he said softly, because she was not. Evil is rarely so romantic. Clara was vain, yes, delusional perhaps, but her crime was born not of hatred, but of need, the need to be remembered, to be adored. He stared into the empty fireplace. The world is not kind to women who fade. Clara chose to blaze, even if the fire consumed her. I looked down. And Victor? He will recover, physically at least. But betrayal, mon ami, that takes longer to heal. We left shortly after. Outside the clouds had broken, and the London air was washed clean by a light rain. As we walked, Poirot paused before a perfume boutique, gazing at the elaborate display. A curious thing, is it not? He said. What is? That something invisible should leave such a powerful impression. He tapped the glass gently. Perfume, Hastings. It lingers, long after the wearer has gone. As we rode the cab back to Whitehaven Mansions, I found myself unusually quiet. The city passed by in a grey blur of soot and street lamps, but I hardly noticed. At last I said, Poirot, I still don't understand. She had everything, beauty, talent, a career most people would envy. Why, this. Poirot looked out the window, his eyes distant. You see, Hastings, he said at length, there are crimes of passion and there are crimes of despair. But Clara Delacroix committed a crime of illusion. Of illusion? Oui. She did not wish to kill. She wished to matter. She was not driven by greed or hatred, but by irrelevance. The most dangerous poison of all. I leaned back. But to poison herself? Just to be seen? Poirot turned to me, the lines around his eyes softening. To a certain kind of mind, mon ami, attention is life. And when it fades, they reach into the shadows for something darker to keep it burning. Even tragedy can be applause. I shivered despite myself. She was so calm, even at the end. Because she had achieved what she wanted, he said quietly. She became unforgettable. The scent, the mystery, it will live on. I didn't know what to say to that. Poirot, ever the philosopher when the moment suited, added gently, You think of crime as a blow struck in anger, but often it is a whisper, a quiet, aching plea to be heard. And with that, he returned to his thoughts, as the cab rolled on beneath the London drizzle. The next morning, I arrived at breakfast to find Poirot already at the table, reading the Times with his usual surgical precision. His eggs remained untouched. "Anything interesting?" I asked, pouring myself tea. "Mais oui," he said without looking up. "Page 7, the arts section." I retrieved the paper, flipping to the page in question. There, beneath a large photograph of Clara Delacroix's face, poised striking, immortalized in monochrome, ran the headline, "Scandal breathes new life into Perfume House. Essence de Minuit sells out across Europe." I stared in disbelief. "They're selling it?" I said. "After everything?" Poirot nodded. The scandal gave it mystery. The tragedy gave it depth. The public is captivated. "But it's madness," I said. "They know it's the perfume involved in a crime." He folded the paper carefully. "Which is precisely why they want it, Hastings." He stood, straightening his cuffs. "Fame," he said, "is not earned by virtue. It is given by curiosity and sustained by myth." He walked to the window, gazing out over the grey city. "She set out to create something unforgettable, and in the end, she did." I said nothing, watching as a carriage passed by, its wheels hissing through the damp street. Poirot turned back, eyes glinting. "Ah, mon ami," he murmured. "Fame is a perfume most intoxicating and most deadly." He reached for his teacup with perfect poise. And somewhere, far beyond, Clara Delacroix lingered. Her final note, etched not in scent, but in scandal. And so, with the scent of truth stronger than any fragrance, the mystery of Essence de Minuit was brought to light, not by fingerprints or footprints, but by Poirot's gift for unraveling the delicate threads of the human heart. Poirot, "Non, mon ami, the clues are not always in what one sees, but in what one feels. The psychology, the motive, it is there, like a faint aroma in the air. It lingers, yes, and it tells all." Hastings. "Well, I still say if someone gives me perfume for Christmas, I'll be checking the ingredients first." Poirot. "Ah, Hastings. Let us hope they give you socks instead." What do you think was the real turning point in the case that exposed Clara's deception? Was it the missing page, Victor's collapse, or perhaps the psychology hidden in her journal? Let us know your theory in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you would have solved it. If you enjoyed this Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more brilliant detective stories to life every single week. Stay tuned. More thrilling Poirot cases are just around the corner. Until then, keep your little grey cells sharp.